In today's video, I will show you how I made this pink dress. This is a project suggested by my patrons who wanted some content on shaping a neckline on double bed. Here are a couple of the samples I demonstrated in a video available on my Patreon. To jump into an even more fun challenge, I decided to make myself a maternity dress, knitted fully on double bed as well, just so I can show the process of that too. If you follow me on Patreon, you already know that I am expecting a baby in the fall, and I wanted to challenge myself to make a bump-friendly dress that I could also wear after the pregnancy. In this video, you will see how I constructed the dress to hopefully achieve that. To make this dress, I will be using a very popular stitch here on YouTube. Fabrics knitted on double bed can feel a little bit on the heavier side, and since it is summer right now, I wanted my dress to feel as light as possible in this stitch. I will show you how I adapted the stitch to make the fabric a little bit more see-through and not so heavy. Here you can see the difference between the two samples and how the other one feels much lighter. Also, my initial idea, as you can see in this brilliant sketch of mine, was to have a little frill at the bottom. The problem with this frill was that it was much denser than the rest of the body, and it just didn't look or feel right. After testing a couple of ideas to make it less heavy and more open, and kind of failing, as now the frill was not doing what it was supposed to do anymore. You can see it's not so nice and frilly anymore. I decided to completely give up on it and just keep the bottom nice and straight. This is also a little test of the seam, as I knew I wanted the skirt to be made from two rectangle panels that will be sewn together, and I wanted to see here where in the pattern would be the best to have the seam. As with every knitting project, after testing and choosing the final stitch, we will knit a tension swatch to calculate our gauge. Make sure to always steam and wash the tension swatch to get the most accurate gauge possible. Usually, to calculate your gauge, you will knit a swatch and then count your stitches and rows. But in this case, since we have quite a lot of transfers, I had to work backwards. So I knitted this tension swatch, and I know it is 50 stitches wide and 60 rows long. And I measured it, and then I used those numbers and I calculated my gauge the other way around. Once I know how many stitches and how many rows I have per 1 centimeter, it is easy to plan my dress and all the increases and decreases to shape it. I knew from the beginning that I wanted the skirt part to be gathered at the waist to create a bit of flare, so I ended up making the panels almost as wide as the machine, as I wanted them to be as wide as possible to gather them quite a lot. I made sure to fit 24 repeats of the stitch pattern plus 2 extra stitches for the seam. To begin the panel, I will do a full needle waist yarn cast on, will thread my final yarn, knit the cast on row and 3 rows tubular, followed by 2 rows all needles. I will now set my row counter to 0 as I am about to begin transferring stitches. This way it is easy to keep track of my repeats, as I have 1 every 20 rows. If you would like to practice this stitch, please make sure to watch the full tutorial, which I will link below. Here I will only show you what I did to make the fabric more summer friendly. If you watch the tutorial for the stitch, you will notice that I left all needles in work on the ribber bed for the entire sample. And like I said before, to achieve a lighter fabric, I will slightly change the stitch by having every other needle in work on the ribber bed instead. So this is what I'm doing now. I'm transferring to have every other needle in work on the ribber bed. A very important thing to mention here is to make sure that when you do this transfer, you ensure that you have 1 needle in work on the ribber bed that goes right in between the 4 needles that we just emptied on main bed. You can see in the picture here how that looks when I am bringing the needles forward. This is very important, as if the needle position is different, you might have issues forming the stitches, as you will see later, when putting the last 2 needles in work on main bed. Before knitting the first row, I will bring the needles all the way out and knit 2 rows. And just like this, I will continue with the repeat for 240 rows for both panels. In total, it took me about 2 days to knit these panels. Since one repeat is formed from 2 transfers and we are alternating from beginning the transfers by emptying the 4 needles in the very center or transferring so that the 4 needles in the center have 2 stitches, this is how I wrote down what I need to do every 10 rows. However, after doing so many repeats, I was able to know how the repeat goes by looking at the last eyelets I formed, but it was always nice to be able to check with my notes and make sure that I'm not making any mistakes. Many hours later, I finished the 240 rows and I was ready to cast off, so I transferred all stitches from river bed to main bed. I pulled the needles all the way out, then pushed them back, laid my yarn on top of the latches so I can manually knit a loose row to do a chain stitch cast off using my latch tool. This dress will be constructed in a very similar way to my wedding dress. I really love the shape of my wedding dress and how simple it is to construct it, and I wanted to use the same method for this one. I will shape the panel so it is narrower at the bottom and wider at the top to serve as a little cap sleeve. This makes it so much easier and quicker as I don't need to actually knit sleeves. And for the top, I increased 1 stitch every 6 rows on both sides. This is how I increased. I used a 2-prong tool and I made sure to increase on both beds. For the river bed, last time I formed a new stitch. Now I will just transfer that stitch so I can continue having every other needle in work. I will alternate that every 6 rows, 1 increase, 1 simple transfer. Since there's quite a lot going on with the stitch and the increase, I also made sure to write down every single row where I have to do an increase so it's easier to keep track and not forget to do them. I'm now ready to shape my neckline. I will not go into very much detail on the calculations and how I shape the neckline. If you need help with that, I will have a video that demonstrates all about calculating and shaping necklines on double bed. Like with single bed as well, when shaping a neckline, we will do it one side at a time. So I'll put half of my needles plus the stitches I will cast off in the center on hold. I'll make sure to also set both my carriage to hold. I'm ready to do the first decrease. I will continue with the stitch and then do the increase on the other side as well. While I don't mean to discourage you, I have to say that shaping necklines on double bed while also producing stitches can be a little bit difficult and requires a lot of focus. And just like me, you might actually mess up the first panel you will be knitting. You will see in just a minute. But only by practicing and doing the thing that scares or overwhelms you, you will get better and better and more confident in adventuring in complex projects like this one. I also wanted to create a little shoulder slope so that the top fits a little bit better. So you can see here how I'm putting needles on hold for the last rows to create that. And just like with the skirt panel, when finished, I will transfer all stitches from ribbon bed to main bed and manually knit a loose row to do a chain stitch cast off. Once I finish with this side, I will cast off the stitches in the center in the same way, and I will shape the other side, for which I will have to mirror everything I did for the right side. But like I mentioned before, my first attempt at knitting the top part didn't come out as nice as I hoped. You can see here how the two sides of the neckline are not the same at all. And that is even distorting the neckline a little bit, even though I knitted the same number of rows for both of them. This only means that I have to reknit it. For the second attempt, I wanted to do this the proper way, by actually creating the chart and mapping all my decreases and increases. Here I am creating a chart on squared paper that I will scan and print out. In this chart, every stitch that I marked in pink is a purl stitch when looking at the right side of the fabric, and all the squares that are left in white are knit stitches. I then use magic tape to put all these pages together, ensuring to have complete repeats across the large surface where I can begin mapping my decreases and increases. I only need to do this for half of the top as the two sides are the same. You can see here how I'm marking the increases every 6 rows on the edge. I will also color in the 3 stitches that are involved in the increase. This way I can mark on my chart when I want to stop in the stitch repeat or where I have to do the last transfer to make it easier to keep track of everything. We'll do the same for the decreases for the neckline, and I will write down all the rows and make any notes or marks I need to make my life easier when knitting. Again, I only need to map half of the neckline as the two sides are the same. Sometimes this might seem like the longer road to take, but in this case I lost more time knitting a panel that I didn't end up using than if I would have just had my chart from the beginning and nailed the panel the first try. But hey, we live and we learn, and let's hope that this gives you a little lesson and you can learn from my mistake. All my panels are finished. I'm ready to assemble the dress. I have 2 panels for the skirt and 3 panels for the top. I will begin by sewing the skirt panels together to create a tube basically, so I need to do 2 seams here. I really enjoy hand sewing my panels together, so I will do that using a mattress stitch. At this point I have only steamed the fabric. I will wash it after doing these 2 seams. This way I can ensure that it lays nice and flat and that the length of the skirt will be even across. The next step is to the shoulder seam, and I will do that by hand as well. After I have done these 4 seams, I will wash my panels and let them dry flat. I washed them in the washing machine on a quick cold cycle. The fabric shrunk a little bit as it was expected since we have merino wool in composition. Depending on the yarn that you are using, you might want to wash these by hand, not in the washing machine. And here's the top. I made the back from 2 separate panels as I thought this would give me more freedom to play with the size of the top part of the dress. My initial idea was to overlap the 2 back panels, and you will see that this is what I ended up doing. After doing the side seam of the top, I was ready to begin attaching the top and the skirt together. Before that, I will gather the skirt, and I will do that by crocheting around the chain stitch that I did when I cast off, and I'm going to catch every other chain to reduce the size of the panel by about a half. In the end, I did 2 rows of single crochet around the edge. After the second row, the size was much closer to the size that I wanted to achieve. It is always a good idea to pin the garment you are making and try it on at crucial parts in the construction process, especially for me during pregnancy, as I have not yet made any clothes while having the bumpy bump. So far so good. The front seemed to fit pretty nicely, but the back was not, since most of the change in my body is at the front, so it was large enough, but the back was just a little bit too loose. I decided to sew the front part and then try it on again and see what I can do for the back. When doing this seam, I made sure to pin the top and the skirt together. This way I was able to ensure that I'm doing the seam nice and straight and that the side seam of the top and the seam from the skirt are perfectly aligned on the side. Once I finished the seam, I tried the dress again and realized that the back is still quite loose. What I wanted for this dress was to be able to put it on over my head, so I need to have a little bit of elasticity and space to do that. I didn't want to have any final fastening situation for this dress, as I didn't want to be restricted by that when it comes to the size. I decided to use a little bit of stretch yarn and crochet around the edge at the back to make it pull in a little bit so it's a bit tighter, but still keep the elasticity. This seemed to actually work quite well, so I sewn the first panel. This will stay at the front, the other panel will go behind it, so they will overlap. You can see here that the panels are overlapping quite a bit. If I would have knitted the whole panel for the back as a whole, it would have been way too big. This is how I managed to keep my options open when it comes to the size, and I hope that this can give you an idea for a project of yours as well. I made sure to do some measurements so that the 2 panels are nice and even, and all it was left to do was to sew the second panel, and the dress was pretty much finished. All I had to do after this was to tie in all the loose ends and the dress was finished. And here is the finished dress. All that work, it was all worth it. I'm really happy with how it turned out, even though it took me so much longer than I anticipated. I think I worked on this dress for more than a week now. I still have a little bit of space to grow in it, as I still have a few months left in this pregnancy. I will need to see if I have to undo the seam here at the waist and adjust the size and re-sew it to fit me without the bump, but this size might actually fit me quite well afterwards as well, so I will have to just wait and see. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I really hope that you've learned a couple of things. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye!